So in the last class, like we have learned about a few type of testing, like what is meant by smoke testing and the unit testing, the system testing and the system integration testing. And we have linked that particular testing along with the methods of testing like the black boards, white boards and gray boards. And as part of the today's session, like we are going to continue the types of the testing. So in which like pretty much like we are going to focus upon the regression testing. Okay, so this regression testing is a key thing so which we used to do regularly in our project. So what is the need of the regression testing and why we are going to like giving more importance to the regression testing in the sense. So like in an agile world, so we always deliver the product in feature level. Okay, so we can say it is up in feature level, or we can say like we are delivering in the epic wise. So initially, like whenever the new product is launched, right, so they will be launching the base application, and post that like in each and every update they are going to keep on adding the new feature. So that is what I told, like in an agile, like we always deliver in the feature level, which is nothing but we are going to deliver in epic wise. So which means the new functionalities keep on adding up. So whenever we are adding the new feature, it indicates like new code is introduced. Okay, so we are introducing the new code, and we should always ensure that it is not impacting the existing code, not impacting the existing code. So how we will ensure that, so whether the new code is not impacting the existing code, or technically we can say, so how we will ensure that there is no code breakage in the sense, so only by doing the regression testing. So the primary like need of regression testing is like to ensure that there is no code breakage due to introduction of the new code. Okay, so there should not be any existing code breakage in the old code, so which is nothing but the old feature which is already delivered to the customers. And how we are going to ensure in the sense by doing the regression testing. And how we pick the regression test? So generally, like as part of the test design, like we are going to derive the all possible scenarios. So either in the user story wise or in the epic wise, so we always derive all possible scenarios. So in which like we will identify the happy path flow cases. So what is meant by happy path flow cases in the sense which indicates like the important functionality. Okay, so in a particular user story we may derive n number of scenarios, but in which there will be one core flow. So the core functionality, so which should not get impacted at any case. So like let's say like we can take of an Amazon.in. So like as part of our changes, we are introducing the new like payment. So which is nothing but we are going to introduce the new payment option called as an pay later option in our existing application. So this existing application have n number of functionality. So like we can say the search functionality. So in order to introduce the pay later, we are going to add new code in this particular environment, and due to introduction of new code, it should not impact the search functionality. So we can say the search functionality is an important functionality because this is a key thing. So if the search functionality doesn't work, then the customer can't search the required product. So it is going to give the like how can I say, like it will leads to loss to the business. So in order to avoid the loss to the business, like we will identify all possible important functionality, which is nothing but we will identify all happy path flows, and the happy path flows are treated as a regression test. Okay, so like as part of an regression testing, we are going to execute the regression test, or we can say as an regression test cases. Okay, so we will run this regression test case periodically. So in the real time, right, So like we may have n number of regression test cases because like we may have delivered n number of epics. So let's say like you are having total of an 50 regression test cases. So how we are going to execute this 50 regression test case? So like if we pay attention to the 50 regression test case, then how you will complete the planned user story in the respective sprint. So assume that like the sprint is often 15 days and you have planned close to 7 user story. At any cost, like we need to complete this 7 user story. But if we execute this 15 regression test case, then it is going to consume the time. So in order to avoid the time, so like generally, so the automation test engineer will automate the regression test cases. Okay, so generally during the sprint, so whatever the user story is planned, so we are going to derive the possible test scenario for all planned user story, and out of which like we will be identifying the regression test cases and we will be automating the regression test cases in the same sprint. If both manual testing as well as the automation testing is completed in a same sprint, so we call it as an in-track testing. Sorry, it's called as an in-sprint automation. Okay, so generally nowadays the client expectation is like, so we need to do the in-sprint automation. So if any user story is planned, so like we need to automate the regression test case as well as like we need to complete the manual test case, which we call as an in-sprint automation. But in olden days, like, so like they have followed the approach called as an backlog automation. So backlog automation in the sense, in one sprint they may complete the automation, they will complete the manual testing, and in the other sprint they may complete the automation testing. So that we call it as a backlog testing. But when we use the backlog automation, right, so we are duplicating the testing. Okay, so like in order to avoid the duplicate or in order to avoid the additional effort, so nowadays everyone are preferring the in sprint automation. So nowadays the agile projects follow the in sprints automation. Okay, so the in sprint automation in the sense we are completing both like manual testing as well as the automation testing in a single sprint. Okay, and other thing is like there is an another generic term called as an in-track testing. So what is mean by in-track testing in the sense? So whatever the different types of testing, so which you are performing in the current sprint, we call it as an in-track testing. Okay, so like in-track testing in the sense, in the sprint, whatever the different types of testing you are performing, so generally we call it as an in-track testing. So how we can say like, so within the end of the sprint, so we should always ensure we should complete the in-track testing, which is nothing but you should complete all types of testing, or we can say all possible types of testing in the particular sprint. And as I told, like we are going to automate the regression test cases. So generally the automation test engineer will create a regression suite. So they will be hosting their automation coding in any of the CI/CD server. Okay, so the CI/CD server is, we call it as an Jenkins, and they will schedule the job. So schedule the job in the sense, either the regression test cases may run on daily basis, or they can schedule the like twice in a week or thrice in a week, etc. And they will keep on monitoring so how the regression test cases are working, because one and only if the regression test cases are passing, it indicates like our environment is health. Okay, so we should ensure the health of the environment only by the regression testing. So the regression testing will be running periodically. So even whenever the new code is introduced in our environment, so we can trigger our automation run. So generally in a real time, so we used to automate the regression test cases, which is nothing but we are automating the important functionality of an application to ensure that, so whether the happy path flow cases are working as expected. So why we are doing the regression testing in the sense, like we need to ensure that there is no code breakage due to introduction of the new code. So this is the one of the key testing. So we used to do. Okay, so like we will be identifying the regression test case, and in some projects even they can manually execute the regression test case. If you are unable to automate the regression test case due to some complexity, then they will do the manual testing over the regression test cases. Okay, so this is why like every time we are doing the regression testing. And apart from the regression testing, so there is another testing. So we call it as an Adhoc testing. Okay, so this Adhoc testing is bit different. Like whatever the other types of testing which we have performed so far, like let it be of an unit testing or the smoke testing or the system testing or even the regression testing. So we will be having the test cases. Okay, so either we will be having the test cases or we can say it is a test scenario, etc. But for an Adhoc testing, so we won't have any test case. Okay, so won't have any test case, and we are going to do the random check. Okay, so the random check is always called as an Adhoc testing. Okay, so we always call the random check. So random check in the sense we are going to like simply we are going to validate any of the functionality without any test cases. So for example, so the client can ask you to do some quick Adhoc. So quick Adhoc in the sense you can verify some random scenarios in the application. So you can just navigate to any of the screen and you can check any of the random functionality, which we call it as an Adhoc testing. So basically, like whenever we used to do an Adhoc, so we will find more defects because like we are not following the test scenarios, right? We are not following the test design document. So whatever the scenario which strike in the mind during that particular time, so we are going to check the flow. So which we call it as a random check. So this random check we call it as an Adhoc testing, or sometimes they will call this Adhoc testing as an monkey bots testing as well. Okay, so generally like, so whenever you feel something odd in an application, so we always used to do the quick Adhoc, or else like whenever we log in for the day, so we always do the quick Adhoc to ensure that like everything is working as expected. Okay, so this is what the need of the Adhoc testing. And apart from this, like, so we will do the UAT testing. Okay, so the UAT testing is nothing but we call it as an user acceptance testing. So I told like generally the code will move from the lower to the higher environment. Okay, so we are going to move the code from the lower to the higher environment. So lower in the sense we can say sys and then sit, then followed by UAT. It is always not mandatory that all projects should follow this hierarchy. So like many of the project will have the single test environment, so lower environment and one higher environment. So the system testing, integration testing, they will be doing everything in a single environment, and post that like they will be moving the code to the higher environment. So let's say like you have completed one epic. Okay, so you are planning to deliver this epic to the customer. Then what the developer used to do? So the developer used to move the coding to the higher environment. So this higher environment will always have the production like code. So production like code in the sense, so like how the live environment, how actual environment look like, or whatever the actual environment functionality they have. So they will be having the same like of code, and they are going to integrate the new epic code in this particular environment, and we are going to do the end-to-end testing. Okay, so why we are doing the end-to-end testing in the sense, so we are going to check every nooks and corners of an application to ensure that there is no code breakage. So like we used to do the end-to-end regression testing, the end-to-end testing, and we also used to do the regression testing as we are having the automation scripts. So like we can run the regression testing over it. So whatever the possible testings are there, we used to do all possible testing. And once we are okay with the testing, then we will be providing the QA sign off. Okay, and post providing the QA sign off, so the UAT is an only environment Apart from the QA, so the business people will also test the scenarios. Okay, so like whereas like in the lower environment like sys are set, so it is purely belongs to the QA, so only the QA will do the testing. But in UAT, after the QA sign off, the business people will do the one round of testing. So they will execute some scenarios, whatever the possible scenarios which strike in their mind. So they will execute the scenarios, and one and only if they are okay with it, so then they will give the business sign off. Okay, and after business sign off, the code will be moved to the production environment. Okay, so we can call it as an prod. So it will be moving to the prod environment. And when it will move to the prod environment in the sense, basically, right? So whenever they are going to deploy some new code in the production environment, so they will be having some release date. So the release date in the sense, so the date they are going to migrate the code from the UAT to the prod. So for example, let's say they are planning to release to the customer on like 5th. Okay, but today's date is like it is kind of an 26th. So which means the developer will enable the code freeze in the UAT environment. Okay, so after business sign off, they will introduce the code freeze. So what is meant by code freeze in the sense, which means no new code will be deployed in UAT. Okay, so why we are not deploying any of the new code in the sense, because like if we try to deploy any of the new code, if the new code caused any issues, then it is going to affect the release. So because like we have planned the release date, and they will enable the code freeze, which means the development team won't commit any of the new code in the UAT environment, and post that like on the planned date, so the respective code will be available, it will be moved to the prod. Okay, so this is how like we are doing the different types of testing. So still like we are having some other type of testing, so which we can discuss in the next session. So till this point, do you have any doubt?